Hey guys, tonight we're starting with something far more tempting than any advice your parents ever gave you. The chaotic, glittering history of cocaine. From sacred mountain rituals to Victorian medicine cabinets, from Freud's experiments to the disco-fueled chaos of the 1980s, this tiny white powder has travelled further, ruined faster, and sparkled brighter than almost anything humanity's ever invented. But before we get too deep into 5,000 years of questionable decisions, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy these slow, absurd tales. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're lying right now, perhaps tucked under a blanket halfway between curiosity and sleep. Now, dim the lights, take a deep breath, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We begin in Peru around the year 1480, a time when the Inca Empire hums along like a well-oiled machine powered by sunshine, stone, and something far more interesting. A small green leaf that will, centuries later, turn into one of the most infamous substances on Earth. Yes, that's right. The quiet ancestor of modern cocaine is already here, tucked neatly between the teeth of an Andean farmer. It's called coca, spelled with one A, and infinitely less drama. The Incas don't snort it, of course. They chew it, slowly, rhythmically, like a ritual disguised as routine. A handful of leaves, a touch of lime or ash to release the alkaloids, and suddenly the body feels lighter, the climb less cruel, and the air a little more forgiving. Coca doesn't intoxicate, it endures. It's the caffeine of the Andes, mild, sacred, and profoundly misunderstood by anyone who doesn't live above 3,000 meters. Archaeologists have found coca leaves carefully buried alongside mummies, tucked into woven pouches, and even painted onto temple walls. The message is clear. This isn't just a plant, it's a passport between worlds. In Incan cosmology, coca connects humans to Pachamama, the Earth Mother. Every chew is a prayer, every offering a promise. You might think of it as the ancient version of an energy drink, if your Red Bull also came with spiritual enlightenment. The Incas even controlled its distribution. Commoners could use coca while working, but ceremonial leaves, those of the highest quality, were reserved for priests and the elite. The empire treated coca the way later empires would treat gold, tightly regulated, occasionally taxed, and always respected. Imagine an economy built on something you could fit in your cheek. Now, here's the twist. Buried within these humble green leaves lies a compound. Modern chemists will one day isolate and weaponize into the sleek white powder known as cocaine hydrochloride. The Incas, of course, have no idea. To them, the leaf's power comes from balance, never excess. The idea of refining it into a drug potent enough to start wars, shape cartels, and ruin pop stars would probably make them drop their quipus in disbelief. Still, the chemical foundations are already there. Each coca leaf contains a cocktail of alkaloids, among them cocaine in its most natural, unrefined form. It's gentle, balanced by other compounds, a stimulant designed by nature rather than laboratories. The Inca didn't invent the effect, they simply respected it. You could say they were the first civilization to practice ethical pharmacology. When modern listeners hear cocaine, they picture something neon and dangerous, nightclubs, excess, scandal. But this story begins in a world of terraces and temples where the same substance was revered for helping farmers work longer and priests pray deeper. It's strange, isn't it? How one plant can shift from sacred to scandalous simply by changing hands. Even today, researchers acknowledge the Incas' practical genius. Coca suppresses hunger, eases altitude sickness, and provides steady energy. Benefits that made survival possible in thin Andean air. It wasn't about chasing euphoria. It was about making it through the day without fainting halfway up a mountain. So, As the empire thrived, so did coca. Caravans carried it through valleys. Farmers cultivated it with the same reverence given to maize. Entire rituals revolved around it. And somewhere in the background, history quietly prepared its next act. Europe, conquest and chemistry. The humble green leaf would travel far from these mountains, stripped of its context, refined into powder and reborn as temptation. But for now, in this high mountain air, coca remains what it was always meant to be, sacred, sustaining, and still innocent of the chaos it will one day cause. By the time the sun climbs over the Andes, coca is already hard at work. You see it pinched between lips, tucked into cheekbones, offered to the sky. It's everywhere, woven into rituals, whispered into prayers, and embedded in every breath of this high-altitude empire. To call it a drug would be an insult here. To call it sacred, only half the truth. The Incas believe the coca leaf holds a spirit, a quiet one, not the kind that shouts. They feed it to the gods before planting crops, burn it in offerings before battles, and share it as a sign of peace. To chew coca together is to trust one another. To offer it to the gods is to say, "We're doing our best. Please meet us halfway." And yet, hidden inside this pious routine lies the faint echo of what's to come. You can almost hear the hum of future laboratories, the beakers, the glass tubes, the men in white coats who will one day take this leaf apart, strip it of its meaning, and distill its essence into something that makes the world tremble. The priests here don't know it, but the same chemical calm that helps them pray will one day fuel Wall Street deals and disco nights. In these temples, though, coca still belongs to the divine. The priests of the Sun Temple in Cusco use it to read omens, each leaf a potential prophecy. They cast them on woven cloths, interpreting their patterns like tarot cards of chlorophyll. A certain tilt to the left, rain. A cluster to the right, drought. An upside-down leaf. Maybe the gods are feeling sarcastic today. Every ceremony hums with the scent of smoke and the soft crackle of leaves. Imagine hundreds of years before anyone utters the word cocaine, this same plant already dictating the fate of empires. It's almost funny how the most scandalous stimulant of modern history begins its career as an instrument of devotion. Of course, not everyone gets to chew coca freely. The Inca state regulates it with the same precision. Future governments will try to regulate drugs, though with better results. Farmers, soldiers, and messengers are permitted to use it for stamina. The nobility, and priests reserve the finest leaves for ceremonies. You might say this is history's first controlled substance, administered not by pharmacists but by priests. Modern archaeologists have found ceremonial pouches buried beside mummies, stuffed with coca and lime as if to say, even in death you'll need a little boost for the journey. And it worked. Chemical analysis shows the alkaloids linger in their preserved hair. A 600-year-old drug test failed magnificently. You start to realize everything that will later make cocaine so addictive, its grip on energy, alertness, the illusion of control, already exists here, just balanced by reverence. The leaf gives without taking. The secret is moderation, not manipulation. But history, as you know, can't resist a good remix. It won't be long before foreign boots appear on these mountains, sniffing around for treasure, and finding something far stranger. Gold glitters, yes, but this little green leaf hums. Soon the story will shift from ceremony to commerce, from sacred to scandalous. The coca leaf will trade its altar for a laboratory table, and you, dear listener, will see how a prayer becomes a product. Once curiosity and greed start shaking hands, the wind shifts over the Andes, carrying the smell of burning offerings and distant thunder. You can almost hear the sails of foreign ships approaching the coast, their captains dreaming of gold and not yet knowing they'll find chemistry instead. And so, our sacred leaf waits, innocent, potent, and utterly unprepared for the world that's about to discover it. The mountains hum, and somewhere below the peaks the Empire's routine begins to wobble. Spanish conquistadors have arrived. They bring swords, horses, and a puzzling fascination with everything they don't understand, including the humble coca leaf, which to them is at once suspicious and potentially profitable. They watch the miners, porters, and messengers chew the leaves. Workers climb sheer cliffs without complaint. Soldiers march farther without faltering, and the Empire hums along on what the Spaniards see as some kind of witchcraft. If they had known the chemistry, they might have sniffed a warning. That little green leaf contains cocaine in its unrefined natural form, a chemical that will one day power countless experiments, entertainments, and excesses, but for now simply sustains life. The Spaniards, of course, do what humans do best. They misunderstand, moralize, and tax. Coca quickly becomes both condemned and commodified. The Church denounces it as pagan, while administrators quietly recognize its economic potential. Miners in Potosi, chewing their daily rations, don't care if it's a sin. They care that their legs keep moving and their lungs keep breathing. It's amusing in retrospect. A substance that will one day inspire cocaine-fueled euphoria and chaos begins its European chapter as a survival tool for labourers, rationed and logged like salt or flour. The chemical that modern pharmacologists would isolate centuries later is here, ignored for ritual and exploited for practicality. One hand prays, the other counts leaves like coins. Records from colonial administrators reveal quotas, distributions and taxes, a bureaucratic obsession that echoes into our modern understanding of controlled substances. They treat coca with the same meticulous attention that a contemporary DEA agent might apply to a shipment of white powder, albeit centuries ahead of the chemical sophistication. It's fascinating to consider that every modern cocaine molecule, purified, powdered, packaged, originated in these same green bundles. The leaf's alkaloids, once balanced and mild, are the ancestors of the potent stimulant that will later define nightclubs, Wall Street, jazz clubs, and headlines. Back then, no one knew, but history already laid the foundation. You can almost picture the irony. Priests curse the leaf for being too powerful. Soldiers depend on it to survive. Accountants smile at its practicality. Chemists and fortune hunters are decades away, scribbling notes in the margins of curiosity about Indian stimulants. It's a quiet beginning to a very loud story, and so, coca moves from sacred to systematic. Its ritual meaning continues in hidden corners, but its practical value spreads across the empire. Every chew, every ration, every pious offering becomes a tiny step toward its future as cocaine, the substance we know today, infamous for its speed, its sparkle, its danger. By the time the coca leaf crosses the Atlantic, it has shed most of its sacred context, but retained all of its chemistry. Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries is a place of curiosity and compulsion, a world that hoards curiosity cabinets like children hoard candy, labelling everything from mummified cats to exotic barks. And now, tucked among the curiosities, is a green leaf with a secret, the quiet chemical ancestor of cocaine, waiting to reveal itself to anyone clever, or foolish, enough to probe it. Apothecaries sniff, taste, and nibble. Naturalists press the leaves into herbariums. Doctors scribble notes about Indian stimulants that allow Andean workers to labour endlessly at high altitudes. To the modern ear, you can hear the first whispers of cocaine's future. Alertness, endurance, subtle stimulation. The Europeans, however, mostly admire its novelty rather than its power. They call it Erythroxylum coca, a name that rolls off the tongue like Latin ought to. Names matter, after all. To label a plant is to understand it, at least in theory. In practice, they taste it and shrug. It's bitter, it's exotic. It is, they decide, worth writing about in journals, but not yet worth extracting into powder. Yet, slowly, a pattern emerges. Physicians note curious effects: more energy, suppressed appetite, a sharper mind. Some record it as a tonic for fatigue, others for melancholy. They don't yet know the specific alkaloid, the chemical marvel that modern labs will isolate as cocaine hydrochloride, but they are touching the edges of it. Every chew and nibble in Europe is a tiny rehearsal for the global obsession to come. By the 19th century, interest intensifies. Botanists and chemists, armed with distilled curiosity and fragile glassware, begin to pry apart the leaf's secrets. You can almost hear the quiet click of microscopes, the scratch of quills, and the soft exclamations of discovery. What have we here? And indeed, there is something remarkable. Coca, once sacred in the Andes, is now a subject of study in the laboratories of Vienna, Paris, and Berlin. The same molecules that helped farmers climb mountains without fainting are noted for their physiological effects on the human nervous system. Here, the future cocaine begins to take shape, a compound no longer chewed for balance, but extracted for potency, studied for stimulation, and destined for markets far beyond the highlands. It's easy to imagine a European doctor in a waistcoat peering through a microscope, tasting a drop and thinking, curious, perhaps useful. That curiosity is the seed from which Freud, pharmacists, and eventually nightclubs will sprout. All of modern cocaine's story, its fame, infamy, and chemical audacity, germinates in these quiet, powdered experiments. Meanwhile, the original leaves continue their life back in South America, still chewed, still sacred, still utterly unaware that their chemistry is about to be wrenched from context and turned into something modern humans will obsess over. The irony is delicious. The same plant that nourished empires will one day intoxicate them. So as Europe studies, classifies, and documents, the leaf is quietly preparing its transformation. From Andes mountain paths to laboratory benches, coca steps into a new role, a chemical curiosity with the potential to become a global stimulant. And you, dear listener, are witnessing the opening scene of that metamorphosis, centuries before cocaine becomes a household name and a source of scandal. By the mid-19th century, Europe has grown curious and slightly impatient. Botanists and apothecaries have studied coca for decades, cataloguing leaves, tasting tinctures, and noting the subtle effects on energy and mood. But now, something new stirs in the laboratories. Chemistry itself, precise, rigorous, and occasionally reckless, begins to pry the leaf apart. Enter Albert Niemann, a young German chemist with a moustache that trembles with ambition and a tongue that will soon tremble for entirely different reasons. In 1859, he isolates a crystalline substance from coca, a chemical that had been quietly lurking in the Andes for centuries. He calls it, well, initially just cocaine, because chemists are practical and rarely given to poetic flair. You can almost imagine Niemann carefully weighing, filtering, and tasting the new compound, only to discover that it numbs his tongue. A mild shock runs through him. The leaf's secret has finally been exposed. This is the same plant that helped Andean farmers climb mountains and priest pray, now distilled into a potent transportable substance. The future cocaine is born, gleaming in tiny crystals, and the world is about to notice. The irony is delicious. To the Incas, chewing the leaf meant balance, endurance, ritual. To Niemann, it becomes a product, something isolated, quantified and reproducible. The chemistry is elegant. The alkaloid that powered empires in a natural leaf now has a life of its own, detached from its cultural roots, ready to fascinate physicians, pharmacists, and, eventually, partygoers. He notes its effect carefully. Stimulation, heightened awareness, a curious sharpness. He probably doesn't imagine that in less than a century people will snort it, mix it into tonics, and even put it in soda, transforming the humble Andean leaf into a global spectacle. Modern cocaine, fast, white and potent, owes every molecule to this moment of discovery. Niemann's work also sparks a wave of curiosity across Europe. Chemists tinker, doctors scribble prescriptions, pharmacists experiment. Coca becomes not just a leaf, but a substance that can be isolated, standardized and distributed. An idea that will, centuries later, underpin both medical use and illicit trade. And you, dear listener, should pause and marvel. What began as a sacred chewable leaf in the Andes has now been distilled into something that humans can manipulate at will. The plant's chemistry is unchanging, yet its meaning is entirely up for grabs. The same alkaloid that fueled survival is now the foundation of a drug capable of inspiring genius, obsession, and chaos. Even today, modern cocaine still carries the legacy of this discovery. It is no longer a sacred tool, but its core, the chemical molecule isolated by Niemann, is unchanged. Understanding that link helps you see the leaf not as a harmless herb or as a contemporary vice, but as a bridge across centuries, from ritual to research, from sustenance to scandal. So while Europe marvels at the new crystals, Andean farmers continue their rituals, unaware that the quiet green leaf they chew will one day inspire nightclubs, scandals and headlines. And somewhere in that juxtaposition, between reverence and recklessness, between leaf and powder, history chuckles quietly at human ambition. The next stage of this story, of course, involves someone a little more ambitious, a little more persuasive. Enter Sigmund Freud, who will enthusiastically recommend this new compound for nearly everything, ushering in the era when cocaine leaps from laboratory curiosity to medical fad and eventually global notoriety. It is the 1880s, and Vienna hums with gaslight, ambition, and the occasional overconfident young doctor. Among them is Sigmund Freud, who, like any curious scientist with access to powdered miracles, decides to take a closer look at this mysterious substance Albert Niemann extracted decades earlier. Cocaine, freshly isolated and still dazzlingly new to European minds, promises everything: energy, clarity, courage, and, according to Freud, solutions to pretty much any human ailment. You step into Freud's office. The smell of ink and leather is punctuated by the faint scent of this crystalline stimulant, and somewhere in the corner, a patient coughs nervously. Freud cheerfully prescribes cocaine for depression, for melancholy, for anxiety, even for digestive complaints. If it exists, cocaine can probably fix it, he thinks. And so the molecule that once helped Andean farmers work efficiently in thin air now becomes a symbol of intellectual curiosity and medical optimism. It's almost amusing. The same alkaloid that centuries earlier fueled endurance and ritual is now being endorsed for every conceivable human complaint. Chew it, snort it, mix it with wine. Freud doesn't particularly care. The chemistry is delightful, the effects are observable, and if a doctor's patients happen to feel a little buzzed, well, perhaps that's part of the therapeutic process. Modern listeners might smirk, imagining Freud recommending cocaine like a supplement, unaware that his bright idea will ripple through decades, eventually appearing in tonics, candies, and even sodas. But in his time, he's not being reckless, he's being empirical. The leaf has been transformed, distilled, quantified, and now the molecule itself is the star. You can almost see the irony shimmer. A plant once sacred, once chewed slowly in ritual, is now a pharmacological tool for indulgence and experimentation. And yet, despite the enthusiasm, the underlying chemistry remains unchanged. The same alkaloids Niemann found, the same molecules that helped farmers climb mountains, are now being manipulated for pleasure, curiosity, and human vanity. Cocaine is still just cocaine, but humans are doing new, occasionally absurd things with it. Freud's writings spark interest across Europe. Physicians and pharmacists begin experimenting with doses, concoctions, and syrups. Students mix it into their coffee. Soldiers consider it for stamina. And somewhere in a laboratory notebook, a chemist scribbles a note that will eventually inspire Coca-Cola. A beverage fortified with the stimulating essence of this Andean leaf, distilled into a form Europeans can understand. For modern audiences, the lesson is clear. Cocaine's journey from sacred leaf to chemical curiosity is inseparable from human creativity, hubris, and misunderstanding. Every snort, every powdery indulgence, every headline about excess can trace its lineage back to Niemann's lab and Freud's office. The molecule is constant. It is we who evolve, amplify, and sometimes abuse it. So as Freud writes feverishly, recommending his newfound panacea, the world moves one step closer to the era when cocaine leaves the pages of journals and steps onto the stage of popular culture. And you, gentle listener, are perched at the moment when a sacred plant, a laboratory marvel, and human ambition collide. A collision that will echo through tonics, cafes, and eventually nightclubs across the globe. The leaf story, once sacred and sustaining, now begins its transformation into modern cocaine, a powder both revered and reviled, whose chemical essence will survive centuries of human whimsy, folly, and fascination. London, 1885, or thereabouts. Gas lamps flicker, cobblestones glisten with coal smoke and rain, and somewhere in the heart of the city, the Victorian imagination meets chemistry. It is here that cocaine, freshly liberated from the Andean leaf and celebrated by Freud, begins its great domestic debut. You step into a pharmacy, and the air smells of herbs, alcohol, and ambition. Bottles line shelves like soldiers on parade, each labelled with promises that would make modern regulators faint. Coca wine restores vitality. Cocaine lozenges, sweet relief for teething infants. Elixir of youth, now with cocaine. The Victorians were nothing if not thorough. Cocaine is everywhere, and nowhere is too humble or too proper for it. Imagine, if you will, a teething baby quietly gnawing on a syrupy lozenge laced with the same molecule that would later fuel Wall Street deal-making and nightclub chaos. The chemical hasn't changed, just the context. What was once sacred in the Andes now adorns parlours, clinics, and even dinner tables. The leaf has left the mountains and entered the imagination of a society eager for vitality, courage, and novelty. Victorian doctors praise it for nervous complaints and melancholic dispositions, while pharmacists mix it into tonics and candies, offering a polite euphemism for stimulation. The same molecule that helped farmers endure steep climbs now promises alertness, bravery, and, according to advertisements, general moral improvement. You might chuckle at the irony. A sacred stimulant, once chewed with reverence, is now casually prescribed like sugar or tea. The public naturally consumes eagerly. Gentlemen sip coca wines before promenades, while socialites nibble lozenges at soirees. Athletes, performers, and even artists experiment with this new elixir, fascinated by its effects on energy and perception. Modern cocaine's legacy is already taking shape. Enhancement, subtle intoxication, and cultural fascination wrapped in a neat Victorian bow. It isn't all euphoric glamour. Victorian medical journals hint at risks, agitation, insomnia, occasional mania. But these are footnotes in a culture intoxicated with optimism and chemical possibility. Cocaine is considered miraculous, not dangerous. Its ancestral leaf, still chewed in Peru for balance and ritual, would hardly recognize its distant cousin swirling in wine glasses and sugar lozenges across the globe. And there is a rhythm to it. A Victorian rhythm: curiosity, experimentation, codification. Chemists refine, pharmacists blend, doctors prescribe, and society consumes. Each step builds toward a world in which cocaine is not just a medicinal novelty, but an everyday stimulant with cultural cachet. The molecule that once carried prayers across Andean valleys is now a quiet guest at tea parties and doctors' offices alike. You can almost see the ghost of the Inca farmers, chewing their leaves, wondering at these distant humans who've stripped the plant of its sacred context, yet somehow amplified its effects in ways both impressive and absurd. The chemistry is unchanged, the meaning entirely new. And so, as London hums under coal smoke and fog, cocaine begins its public life, an elixir, a stimulant, a conversation starter. Its path from sacred leaf to powdered miracle is only beginning, and the next chapters will see it sparkle in soda fountains, prescription bottles, and the gaslit streets of the Victorian imagination. Somewhere in the 1880s, a curious pharmacist named John Pemberton decides to mix science, sugar, and a dash of spectacle. The result? A fizzy beverage called Coca-Cola. Yes, that coca, directly descended from the sacred Andean leaf, now bubbles in bottles carrying the same molecule that once sustained farmers and priests, repackaged for Western taste buds and leisure. Imagine the scene: a soda fountain glimmering with brass and glass, steam curling from syrup dispensers. Patrons sip politely, unaware that they are tasting history distilled into sweet, effervescent chemistry. The active ingredient, cocaine hydrochloride, is subtle but present, a whisper of the Andean mountains in every drop. Far from the terraces of Peru, the molecule now carries sugar, carbonation, and, inadvertently, a touch of cultural myth. Victorians, predictably, love it. The drink is marketed as invigorating, healthful, and even a cure for nervous disorders. People write letters extolling its effects, unaware that the same chemical once chewed in ritual is now mingling with caramel colouring and soda water. Cocaine, in this context, is charming, harmless, and socially acceptable, a far cry from the powdery infamy it will eventually acquire. Pharmacists across the country tinker with similar formulas. Tonics, elixirs, and beverages adopt the coca leaf or its extract, promising energy, clarity, and mild euphoria. Soldiers sip it before marches. Businessmen drink it to endure long afternoons of ledgers and litigation. The molecule, unchanged and unashamed, finds new ways to inspire productivity, curiosity, and occasionally reckless optimism. It is also a playground for experimentation. Dosages are inconsistent, recipes vary by town, and local pharmacists delight in minor innovations. One could argue that Victorian cocaine culture is an early form of the startup economy, with each chemist trying to capture a bit of the stimulant market while the public sips obliviously. The same leaf that carried prayers and endurance now fuels commercial imagination, caffeine-adjacent in effect but exotic in origin. Ironically, the original sacred use, ritualized, communal, balanced, becomes almost invisible. Cocaine in soda is private, commodified, and pleasurable without ceremony. Yet the chemistry is unbroken. Every molecule in those sparkling drinks is a direct descendant of the Andean leaves, carrying the same potential to awaken, energize, and eventually intoxicate. Modern cocaine, pure and potent, owes its very existence to these Victorian experiments, whether in wine, syrup, or carbonated sugar water. And so, as Victorian society fizzes and hums with optimism, Coca quietly begins its transformation from botanical curiosity to global stimulant, carrying with it centuries of history, chemistry, and irony. A molecule once revered for sustaining life now prepares to dazzle, amuse, and occasionally scandalize, all in the guise of harmless refreshment. The next chapter naturally turns toward the wider medical world, where doctors, dentists, and artists will experiment more boldly. Cocaine begins to leave sodas behind and enter the bloodstream of society itself, literally and figuratively. Its future as both miracle and menace is only just beginning. By the late 19th century, cocaine is no longer a mere curiosity or soda ingredient. It has invaded every respectable corner of Victorian medicine. Doctors, armed with enthusiasm and scant skepticism, prescribe it for everything from fatigue to melancholy, from teething troubles to general nervous complaints. One can imagine a physician in a waistcoat scribbling furiously, recommending cocaine as a tonic, stimulant, and occasional panacea, all in the name of science. The irony is delicious. A molecule that once assisted Andean farmers in surviving harsh mountain climbs is now being administered in parlours and surgeries, often without much regard for dosage or consequence. The chemistry is unchanged. The context is absurd. Patients sip elixirs, chew lozenges, and occasionally endure injections, blissfully unaware that the same alkaloid once revered as sacred is now being wielded as a prescription for civilization's minor inconveniences. Dentists, ever eager for novelty, embrace cocaine with particular zeal. Local anesthesia becomes possible, brief, effective, and chemically thrilling. The molecule works beautifully, numbing nerves and impressing both patient and practitioner. Yet for some, indulgence creeps in. A syringe here, a lozenge there, and suddenly, what was a medical marvel teeters on the edge of recreational intrigue. Modern cocaine aficionados will recognize these early experiments as familiar territory. Precise chemistry, misapplied human curiosity, and the ever-present risk of overuse. Artists and writers, too, flirt with the substance. They inhale, chew, or sip, seeking mental clarity, inspiration, or perhaps just an adventurous boost. You can almost hear the gaslit rooms of London, Paris, and Vienna filled with a quiet hum of productivity, punctuated by occasional giggles or exclamations as cocaine subtly tweaks attention, focus, and temperament. The molecule, still unchanged from Niemann's laboratory, is now a cultural actor, shaping behaviour as much as biology. It is easy to imagine a modern listener marvelling at the audacity. Today, cocaine carries a reputation for risk, illegality, and social drama. Yet in Victorian society, it is a badge of innovation, a chemical ally in productivity and performance. Every lozenge, every tincture, every coca-infused wine is a small experiment in human enhancement, a rehearsal for the global obsession to come. And somewhere, the ancestors of those Andean farmers might chuckle quietly. The leaf that once sustained life now fuels ambition, vanity, and occasional madness. Its chemistry is indifferent. It simply does what it does, whether in ritual, tonic, or prescription. Cocaine's modern potency, its recreational allure, and even its notoriety all trace back to this Victorian moment of enthusiastic experimentation. By the end of the 19th century, the stage is set. Cocaine is everywhere, in medicine, in beverages, and in the imaginations of the curious. Its reputation oscillates between miracle and menace, presaged by its humble origins as a sacred leaf in the Andes. The molecule is constant, Paris, 1900. The city sparkles under gaslight. The Seine glints with reflections of a world obsessed with elegance, pleasure, and subtle rebellion. Here, in cafes, salons, and gilded drawing rooms, cocaine finds a new audience. The glamorous, the curious, and the morally flexible. It's no longer just a tonic or medicinal aid. It is a social statement, a powdery whisper of sophistication. You step into a Belle Epoque cafe. Mirrors reflect crystal decanters, polished wood, and patrons who puff delicate clouds of cocaine into their nostrils with the grace of someone feeding a small invisible pet. It is all very refined. The molecule, unchanged from Niemann's lab, now dances on velvet trays instead of in lozenges or syrups. Modern cocaine, sleek and potent, owes much of its cultural mystique to these moments of powdered elegance. Cafes advertise their offerings subtly. For the discerning gentleman, one might say, or a discreet aid to the creative mind, hinting at a stimulant that promises both energy and discretion. The same molecule that once fueled the endurance of Andean farmers is now helping Parisian poets, artists, and the occasional bored aristocrat keep their nights lively. You can almost hear the clinking of glasses and the faint snicker of someone who just felt a gentle, stimulating rush. And yet society is uneasy. Moralists wrinkle their noses, journalists hint at corruption, and doctors begin muttering warnings. The first regulatory whispers stir like distant thunder. Cocaine is useful, yes, but potentially dangerous. Its potential for abuse, though still limited, becomes apparent. Already, modern audiences can recognize the pattern. The molecule is constant. Human fascination is relentless. The cultural allure is irresistible. Powdered cocaine carries a veneer of glamour, intellect, and audacity. To inhale it is to participate in a quiet rebellion, to belong to a circle that prizes energy, creativity, and sophistication. Yet beneath the lace and finery lies the same molecule that sustained mountain labourers and energized Victorian society. The chemistry hasn't changed. Only the context and the consequences are evolving. As Paris buzzes, the molecule begins migrating to other cities, other scenes. In Harlem, New York, in smoky music halls, in the hidden corners of cafes and clubs, cocaine quietly seeds the next cultural revolution. Its story, like a well-travelled leaf, begins to span continents, from sacred Andes to sparkling urban centres, retaining its chemical essence while adopting new social meanings. And here's the subtle, ironic twist. For all its glamour, cocaine remains, in essence, the same stimulant it always was. Today's powder, nightclub indulgence, or underground fascination is chemically identical to the tiny leaves chewed in ritual centuries before. The human stories, the ambition, the excess, they are merely the latest layer of a saga that began long before Parisian cafes existed. By the end of the Belle Epoque, the molecule has proved its adaptability. It charms, stimulates, and occasionally scares, setting the stage for the next chapter: jazz, nightlife, and the moral panics of the early 20th century. From sacred leaf to Parisian glitter, cocaine's journey is far from over, and you, gentle listener, are witnessing history in the act of transformation. By 1921, the rhythm of the world had shifted. In Harlem, New York, nightclubs pulsed with brass, piano, and the occasional hush of a snifter being passed around. Cocaine, that molecule first kissed by Andean farmers and later celebrated in Victorian parlours, had now slipped into the very fabric of nightlife. It energized musicians, emboldened dancers, and lent an extra shimmer of daring to anyone curious enough to try it. You step into a jazz club. The air vibrates with syncopated trumpet and saxophone. Cocaine is discreetly present. A mirror tray here, a silver vial there tucked into dressing rooms or resting on piano stools. Modern users will recognize the ritual, careful measurement, anticipation, and the desire to sharpen focus. The molecule itself is unchanged, but its social function has shifted from sacred endurance or Victorian medicinal zeal to fuel for performance and cultural expression. Musicians, especially, treat cocaine like a silent partner. Trombonists hold notes longer, pianists strike keys with precision, and singers glide through verses with heightened awareness of rhythm. The molecule that once sustained Andean labourers' energy now drives improvisation in city basements. Humans add the drama, the chemistry does its quiet work. Cocaine also begins to entangle with wider cultural life. Flappers, socialites, and adventurous artists sample it discreetly, bridging the gap between elite indulgence and artistic experimentation. It carries a veneer of sophistication, a subtle signal of rebellion, and the faint thrill of impropriety. You can almost hear the collective chuckle of society experimenting with a molecule centuries old, now performing new tricks in an urban stage. By 1923, however, the first whispers of concern appear. Reports in newspapers hint at moral danger, anecdotal stories of overindulgence circulate, and some doctors begin to caution against routine use. The molecule, still constant and reliable, is beginning to collide with human scrutiny. The popularity that made cocaine a discreet symbol of glamour and creative vigour also attracts attention from authorities who are just beginning to grasp its societal impact. And here's the subtle, ironic twist. Despite its newfound cultural role, cocaine remains chemically identical to the tiny leaves chewed in the Andes centuries before. The human story changes, the molecule does not. The same stimulant that made farmers resilient and Victorian workers productive now fuels jazz virtuosity, dance floor stamina, and social daring. Its journey continues, ready to encounter regulation, prohibition, and eventual Hollywood fascination. By the mid-1920s, the molecule's social visibility prompts government and medical interventions, setting the stage for the next chapter, the first war on powder. Cocaine's chemical essence remains unaltered, but society is beginning to impose limits, and history is preparing the molecule for its next reinvention. By 1925, the molecule that had energized Harlem jazz clubs, Parisian salons, and gilded drawing rooms was no longer invisible to the watchful eyes of society. Cocaine, once discreetly admired as a stimulant for creativity and social daring, had attracted the attention of newspapers, doctors, and government officials alike. Its popularity, thrilling as it was, now sparked moral concern and regulatory action. Authorities in the United States and parts of Europe began to impose restrictions. Cocaine sales were limited, labelling requirements introduced, and medical endorsements re-evaluated. Pharmacies that once sold coca-based tonics or lozenges now removed or reformulated them. Yet the molecule itself remained entirely indifferent. Chemically, it was the same stimulant that had sustained Andean farmers and inspired Victorian poets. The change was entirely social. Human fascination now collided with legality. In clinics and parlours, doctors retracted some of their earlier enthusiasm. Cocaine was no longer the universal remedy for fatigue, melancholy, or creativity. Patients who once received it in tiny medicinal doses were now subject to oversight. Still, underground circles thrived. Musicians, writers, and socially adventurous individuals continued to seek it out, carefully measured and privately enjoyed. The molecule's effects, heightened energy, mild euphoria, and sharper focus, remained reliable, indifferent to moral scrutiny or legal boundaries. Cultural perception began to shift. Cocaine, already glamorous, now carried a dual identity, a stimulant of sophistication and a substance of controversy. Modern listeners will recognise this pattern immediately. The chemical is unchanged, but its social meaning fluctuates. The molecule, constant and loyal, adapts to human imagination, while society attempts to contain it. Ironically, the molecule's history of adaptation continued. From sacred Andean leaf to Victorian medicine, Parisian elegance and Harlem jazz, cocaine had always found new social niches. The mid-1920s regulatory efforts were simply the next chapter, attempts to rein in a stimulant that had already woven itself into culture. The molecule remained faithful to its chemistry, but humans now began to define its limits, risks, and moral boundaries. By the late 1920s, the stage was set. Cocaine had established its dual reputation, alluring and sophisticated for some, dangerous and illicit for others. Its journey from sacred leaf to regulated substance demonstrated a pattern that would continue through Hollywood, cartels, and global markets. The chemistry remains constant, while humanity continuously reshapes the story. With early regulation in place and cultural fascination undiminished, cocaine was ready to enter a new arena. Hollywood's golden age, where secrecy, celebrity indulgence, and luxury would redefine its allure once again. By the early 1940s, the spotlight had shifted from jazz clubs to silver screens. Hollywood, gleaming and glamorous, offered a new stage for cocaine, the same molecule that had energized Andean farmers, Victorian poets, and Harlem musicians now coursed quietly through studio lots and star-studded suites. Its chemistry remained unchanged, but its social role had evolved. Cocaine was no longer a public stimulant. It was a secret vice for the glittering elite. You wander past the bright marquees of Los Angeles, peering into Golden Age studios where directors bark orders and actors rehearse lines under hot lights. Behind closed doors, silver compacts, velvet pouches, and discreet vials carry the familiar white powder. Modern cocaine users would recognize the ritual. Careful measurement, anticipation, and a desire to heighten energy, creativity, or simply endure long, grueling shoots. The molecule, steadfast as ever, performs the same subtle work: alertness, mild euphoria, and enhanced focus. Humans, of course, add the drama. Stars of the era, actors, writers, and directors treat cocaine as a secret collaborator. Long nights of filming, tedious rehearsals, and the relentless demands of fame require a quiet stimulant. While the public sees glamour, charm, and effortless poise, the powder works behind the scenes, sharpening lines, steadying nerves, and lending just enough energy to keep appearances flawless. The chemical itself remains neutral. Hollywood imposes all the intrigue. The irony is delicious. A molecule that once connected humans to Pachamama in the Andes now connects them to celluloid dreams. Cocaine travels centuries and continents, retaining its chemical essence while society repeatedly reinvents its context. The same alkaloid that sustained workers in high-altitude fields now ensures that an actor's eyes stay bright under blinding lights, that a director's mind keeps spinning with plots, and that scripts are rewritten in the quiet of night. And yet, secrecy is everything. Studios cultivate an image of sophistication and control. Scandals are hushed with studio money, career-saving contracts, and discreet discretion. Cocaine's cultural footprint in Hollywood is subtle but pervasive, a chemical companion in the shadows, invisible to the public eye yet essential to the machinery of fame. Meanwhile, the molecule's history whispers from beneath the glitz. Its journey from sacred leaf to luxury stimulant reminds us that chemistry remains constant, while humans endlessly adapt context. What is a stimulant in one era, an energy booster for farmers, is an illicit indulgence in another, and a secret fuel for creativity in yet another. By the end of the 1940s, cocaine's Hollywood presence is firmly entrenched. It will remain largely hidden through the 1950s, quietly influencing performances, parties, and the social rituals of the elite. Its chemical reliability endures even as its legal and cultural status evolves, and as the stew molecule works its discrete magic. The stage is set for the next era of experimentation. Post-war society, counterculture, and the glamorous resurgence of cocaine in the 1960s. While Hollywood glittered, the world of science and industry quietly flirted with the same molecule. Cocaine, chemically identical to the leaves once chewed on Andean terraces centuries ago, had attracted attention in pharmaceutical laboratories and military programs. Chemists admired its reliability, doctors debated its applications, and soldiers encountered its chemical cousins in the form of benzodrine and other stimulants. During World War II, stimulants were in high demand. Pilots, soldiers, and long-distance drivers consumed amphetamines to stay alert, while cocaine, less common but chemically related, hovered in laboratories and hospital studies. The molecule's fundamental properties, heightened focus, mild euphoria, and stamina, made it a silent ally of efficiency. Yet, in contrast to its Andean ancestors' ritualized moderate use, modern applications sometimes approached industrial-scale recklessness. Pharmaceutical companies quietly explored cocaine derivatives, both for medical research and commercial profit. Cocaine's anesthetic properties were already well known. Dentists relied on it, surgeons experimented with it, but the mid-century fascination focused on its stimulant qualities. Its chemical reliability meant that effects were predictable, an alluring trait in a world obsessed with control, efficiency, and performance. Hollywood and science intersected unexpectedly. The stars who relied on discrete doses for long nights of filming mirrored the laboratory experiments in miniature. The molecule, indifferent to fame or discovery, performed its duties faithfully, whether in a silver compact or a research beaker. Modern users would recognize the pattern: meticulous dosing, anticipation, and careful observation of effects. Chemistry had not changed. Human context had. There's irony here that would make any historian smile. The same alkaloid that sustained an Andean farmer on a mountainside, or fueled Victorian poets' productivity, now underwrote war efforts, medical experimentation, and cinematic perfection. Cocaine was both tool and temptation, its dual nature reinforced by human imagination. By the 1950s, cocaine had established itself as a quiet constant in multiple spheres: clandestine Hollywood indulgence, experimental pharmaceutical use, and occasional medical application. Its potency and effects were unaltered. It was society that moulded meaning, legality, and taboo. The molecule remained a reliable stimulant, while humans debated morality, utility, and risk. And yet, for all the secretive indulgence and scientific curiosity, cocaine's story was far from over. As the 1960s approached, counterculture movements and social experimentation would awaken the molecule's glamorous allure once again, setting the stage for an era where fame, music, and rebellion intertwined with chemistry in ways that would define a generation. By the early 1960s, cocaine had stepped out from the shadows of secretive studios and laboratories and into the limelight of a world eager to experiment. The molecule remained chemically faithful, its stimulating effects, mild euphoria, and focus unchanged. But society's interpretation of its use was transforming. Counterculture movements, music, art, and social rebellion gave cocaine a new identity. Glamorous, exotic, and dangerously fashionable. In cosmopolitan cities like Los Angeles, New York, and London, cocaine slid effortlessly into nightlife. Celebrities, musicians, and avant-garde artists embraced it as both a stimulant and a social statement. The molecule, as always, made no demands. Chemistry was predictable. But humans attached layers of cultural meaning, transforming a stimulant into a symbol of style, excess, and creative daring. You imagine a party in 1965, dim lights, laughter, jazz and early rock drifting through open windows, and discrete lines of white powder resting on mirrored trays. Cocaine's subtle effects heighten performance, sharpen wit, and embolden social adventurers. Modern listeners might recognize the ritual: precise measurement, anticipation, and a quiet thrill of indulgence. The molecule has travelled centuries, continents, and social contexts, yet its chemical integrity has never wavered. Irony follows everywhere. The alkaloid, once revered by Andean farmers for endurance and once prescribed to Victorian teething infants, now defines late-night glamour, social daring, and rebellious sophistication. Its journey is a testament to human creativity in repurposing chemistry. Same molecule, endlessly reinterpreted. Pharmaceutical and medical circles watch quietly, aware of its effects but largely sidelined by social experimentation. Cocaine's allure, amplified by fame and cultural daring, challenges authorities and moralists alike. Laws and regulations exist, but selective enforcement, social privilege, and secrecy allow the molecule to circulate among those with ambition, wealth, or artistic purpose. By the late 1960s and into the 1970s, cocaine's image as a glamorous, white, and expensive indulgence solidifies. It is no longer just a stimulant. It is a cultural icon, a chemical shorthand for status, creativity, and modern rebellion. And yet, beneath the glitz and allure, the molecule itself remains loyal to its chemical design, unchanged, reliable, and ready for the next chapter of human interaction. As the decade closes, cocaine stands at a crossroads, poised to move from the studios and elite parties of Hollywood into the broader social consciousness, where global demand, new markets, and mass production await. Its journey from sacred leaf to symbol of glamour continues, carrying centuries of history in every unassuming white crystal. By the early 1980s, cocaine had left the dimly lit studios of Hollywood and the smoke-filled jazz clubs of Harlem far behind. The molecule, still chemically identical to the leaves once chewed in the Andes, was now flooding the world in unprecedented quantities. Colombia had emerged as the epicenter, and the world's appetite for the white powder was insatiable. Miami, Florida, became a fever dream of speedboats, neon lights, and the constant whisper of currency exchanging hands. You step onto the shores of South Florida. The air smells faintly of salt water, gasoline, and something else. Sugar-white powder that glints in sunbeams as it passes from one hand to another. Cocaine is everywhere, in nightclubs, private planes, luxury cars, and briefcases. The molecule remains indifferent, performing the same chemical trick it has for centuries, stimulating, energizing, sharpening perception. But humans have added scale, secrecy, and enormous consequence. Cartels rise with almost cinematic precision. Planes skim low over jungles, rivers carry hidden cargo, and airstrips appear where none should exist. Cocaine's journey from leaf to refined powder has been industrialized. Purification, packaging, and global distribution are now highly organized operations. Yet the chemistry is faithful. Every crystal, every line retains the stimulant power first discovered in the Andes, untouched by morality, legality, or ambition. Miami's social landscape changes as the powder enters the elite, party, and entertainment circuits. Nightclubs thrive on the molecule's energy, creating a cultural moment of excess and glamour. Musicians, business people, and ambitious newcomers alike are seduced by its reliable effects. It energizes the night, accelerates social interaction, and becomes a silent partner in a decade obsessed with wealth, speed, and style. But as always, the molecule is dual purpose. The same substance that fuels penthouse parties also flows into darker channels. Street-level distribution, gang operations, and criminal enterprise follow closely behind the glamorous scenes. The chemical properties remain unchanged, but human interpretation splits. For some, cocaine is glamour. For others, it's survival, desperation, and crime. Irony persists. The sacred coca leaf that sustained labourers in high Andean fields now fuels a continent-wide frenzy of wealth, risk, and excess. The molecule remains loyal to its chemical design, alertness, stamina, subtle euphoria, while society applies both adulation and fear. The boom of the 1980s is not just about quantity, it is a social, cultural, and economic explosion, with cocaine at the centre, quietly obeying the laws of chemistry while humans scramble to impose theirs. By the mid-1980s, Miami is fully transformed into a symbol of this snowstorm. Wealth, danger, and nightlife intermingle, setting the stage for the crack epidemic, social divisions, and political response. The molecule remains constant. History, society, and consequence are what surge forward. By 1985, cocaine had morphed yet again, not in chemistry, but in social meaning. The molecule itself, faithful to its stimulant nature, continued to energize, heighten focus, and provide subtle euphoria. Yet humans, as always, divided its usage along lines of wealth, geography, and opportunity. In Miami penthouses and Manhattan nightclubs, powder remained white, pristine, and expensive, a symbol of glamour and affluence. Socialites, celebrities, and ambitious businessmen indulged discreetly, using cocaine as a stimulant, social lubricant, and badge of status. Modern listeners will recognize the ritual: careful measurement, anticipation, and the desire to enhance performance or prolong a night of revelry. The molecule, unaltered, delivers as reliably as it did for Andean farmers centuries earlier, though in vastly different contexts. Meanwhile, in urban neighbourhoods across the United States, a new iteration of the same molecule emerged: crack cocaine. Chemically derived from powdered cocaine but altered for smokable use, crack was cheaper, faster acting, and far more addictive. Entire communities were swept up in its rapid-fire effects, while society, politicians, media, and law enforcement scrambled to respond. The molecule's chemistry had been modified for a new delivery method, but its stimulant essence was the same. The irony is stark. One molecule, two worlds: high-rise glamour and street-level desperation. The same white powder that fueled Miami nightclubs now created crack houses, prisons, and social crises. Modern cocaine users may recognize the difference in speed, dosage, and social context, but the molecule's core, its ability to stimulate, energize, and provide brief euphoria, remains constant. Humans, as ever, interpret its effects through culture, economics, and morality. By 1986, public policy reacted swiftly. The Anti-Drug Abuse Act codified harsh penalties, particularly targeting crack possession. Meanwhile, cocaine hydrochloride, the original glamorous white powder, remained legally accessible in limited contexts. The chemical was unchanged. Social, legal, and economic frameworks had changed dramatically. Double standards abounded, and irony thrived. The molecule itself never favoured privilege, but society certainly did. In this decade, the cocaine molecule exists in parallel worlds. It energizes bankers and nightclubbing elites by day, while haunting struggling communities by night. Its history, Sacred Leaf, Victorian tonic, Hollywood vice, culminates in a social paradox, a single chemical entity, treated as both glamour and scourge, admired and demonized simultaneously. As the 1980s thundered on, Miami's neon nights and crack-affected neighborhoods stood as contrasting tableau, a reminder that the molecule itself is loyal and predictable. Humans are the ones who introduce chaos. And just beyond the decade, a new cultural icon, Nancy Reagan, would step into the spotlight, attempting to direct the narrative and moral panic that cocaine had now fully inspired. By the late 1980s, cocaine had achieved full cultural notoriety. Its molecule, the same alkaloid chewed by Andean farmers, refined for Victorian medicine, and discreetly enjoyed by Hollywood stars, remained steadfast. Its stimulant effects were unchanged, reliable as always. Humans, however, had escalated the drama. Enter Nancy Reagan, First Lady of the United States, who waged a symbolic war. Just say no. The campaign sought to turn the molecule from glamorous indulgence and social scourge into a national moral enemy. The imagery was vivid. Public service announcements, school assemblies, and glossy magazine spreads, imploring children, teenagers, and adults alike to reject cocaine's charms. The molecule, oblivious to politics, continued to behave chemically as it always had, stimulating neurons, energizing the body, and inducing mild euphoria, while society tried to weaponize morality against it. Meanwhile, the dual nature of cocaine persisted. For the wealthy and the adventurous, white powder still glittered in nightclubs and private parties, a badge of status, a stimulant, and a social lubricant. For marginalized communities, crack cocaine had wrought devastation, addiction, incarceration, and fractured families. The molecule's chemical fidelity remained constant. Human consequences had diverged dramatically. Nancy Reagan's campaign, while symbolic, reflected a broader societal anxiety. Governments, law enforcement, and media outlets began focusing on both supply and demand, imposing harsher penalties and amplifying fear. Cocaine's chemical neutrality, however, could not be legislated. Its stimulant effects, potential for addiction, and social interpretations endured, proving again that chemistry is predictable, humans are not. Irony abounds. The sacred coca leaf that enabled survival in the Andes, once transformed into glamorous Hollywood powder, now found itself vilified in public campaigns. The molecule had travelled centuries, continents, and social contexts, yet it remained consistent, unchanged, potent, and ready to serve human intentions, whether noble, reckless, or clandestine. By the end of the 1980s, cocaine had solidified its place as a global symbol, simultaneously glamorous, dangerous, and omnipresent. Its story was no longer just a chemical tale. It had become a reflection of society's contradictions, ambitions, and fears. The molecule had endured, loyal to its design, while humans continuously reinterpreted its meaning, legality, and morality. By the early 1990s, cocaine had fully matured into a global commodity. Its molecule, steadfast and chemically identical to the sacred coca leaf once chewed in the Andes, now fueled enormous empires built on speed, secrecy, and sheer audacity. Colombia became the epicenter, and one name towered above the rest: Pablo Escobar. Escobar's empire was astonishing in scale and ambition. Plains skimmed jungle canopies, small airstrips sprouted in the most improbable locations, and rivers carried barrels of cocaine to the coast. Trucks, boats, and even submarines became temporary homes for the white powder, which remained chemically unchanged, reliable, potent, and utterly indifferent to whether it travelled in a farmer's pouch or a gold-plated briefcase. You wander through this era, and it is cinematic in its excess. Money piles up like small mountains, walls of cash held together by rubber bands and greed. Pistols lie beneath dinner plates. Bodyguards patrol estates like discreet shadows. All the while, cocaine, the molecule itself, performs consistently, energizing, stimulating, and subtly euphoriant, while humans orchestrate chaos and fortune. The irony is delicious. A plant once revered as sacred in Andean fields now fuels jet-setting kingpins, luxurious mansions, and global notoriety. Its chemical constancy contrasts sharply with human unpredictability. Where once coca connected humans to Pachamama, now cocaine connects humans to power, money, and danger, a different kind of sacred, but sacred nonetheless. Escobar is not alone. Other cartels rise in Mexico, Peru, and Colombia, each competing for routes, markets, and influence. The molecule travels across continents, loyal to its chemical design, while human networks expand, fracture, and collide. Modern listeners might recognize the duality. The stimulant is the same, whether fueling a boardroom deal in New York or a jungle airstrip in Colombia. Humans, not chemistry, determine consequence. By the mid-1990s, the story of cocaine is no longer just about glamour or illicit fun. It is war, politics, and society intertwined with chemistry. The molecule has remained constant through centuries and continents, while human ambition has pushed its consequences to unprecedented extremes. As the decade progresses, the stage is set for bloodshed, downfall, and societal reflection. The next acts of the cocaine story, the bloody harvest, and the fall of the lords. As the 1990s unfold, cocaine's chemical fidelity remains absolute. Its stimulant effects, subtle euphoria, and energizing qualities unchanged. What has changed is everything around it: human ambition, greed, and conflict. The price of the molecule's journey is counted not in grams or dollars, but in lives. In the jungles of Colombia, farmers cultivate coca leaves under the constant shadow of cartels. These leaves, chemically identical to those once revered in the Andes, will eventually be processed into powder and shipped across continents. Yet the people who grow them face coercion, violence, and exploitation. Modern listeners might be startled to realize that the same molecule which fueled Victorian tonics or Hollywood glamour now underwrites fear and survival. Addicts in cities far and near suffer as cocaine infiltrates daily life. Some chase the glamour of white powder in penthouses, others face the brutal speed of crack on urban streets. The molecule performs consistently, but society has split its perception into extremes: luxury and tragedy, indulgence and desperation, reward and punishment. Political corruption and cartel violence escalate alongside cocaine's distribution. Bombings, assassinations, and police clashes are not collateral. They are intrinsic to the system that channels this molecule. Escobar's empire, like a carefully constructed chemical reaction, eventually reaches instability. Pressure builds, reactions occur, and the human costs multiply. Every kilogram of powder carries echoes of lives disrupted, economies warped, and families torn apart. Ironically, despite all the chaos, cocaine itself remains obedient to the laws of chemistry. It does not care whether it fuels ritual, glamour, war, or despair. Its effects are predictable, consistent, and reliable. It is humans who bend morality, legality, and ethics around it, never the other way around. By the late 1990s, as cartels face government crackdowns, infighting, and law enforcement pressure, the human toll is staggering. Farmers, traffickers, addicts, law enforcement, and bystanders, all are caught in the same white storm. Cocaine is unchanged, loyal to its chemical design, while humans pay the price for ambition, desire, and society's contradictions. the stage is now set for the final act of the era. The fall of the lords, when cartels crumble, leaders die or flee, and the molecule continues its journey, untouched by history, but forever enmeshed in human consequence. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, the reign of the great cocaine kingpins had begun to crumble. Pablo Escobar was dead, other cartel leaders were captured or fled, and law enforcement crackdowns had shattered the visible hierarchy. Yet through it all, the molecule itself, the same alkaloid chewed by Andean farmers centuries before, remained unchanged. Cocaine had survived history, empire, war, and crime, loyal to its chemical nature even as its human empires fell apart. The fall of the lords was dramatic and cinematic. Cartel mansions emptied, money dried up, and power vacuums created chaos. Former allies became enemies, neighbourhoods destabilised, and yet the white powder continued to flow. Smugglers adapted, new networks emerged, and demand remained insatiable. The molecule did not retire with its masters. It persisted, indifferent to fame, fortune, or morality. Ironically, the collapse of central figures did little to curb global consumption. Cocaine hydrochloride, refined to perfection in clandestine laboratories, continued to travel across continents. London clubbers, Berlin students, New York financiers all partook in its effects, oblivious to the violent histories that had produced the white powder. The molecule itself remained consistent, obedient to chemistry, but immune to human hubris. Meanwhile, communities in Colombia and other production areas faced the long shadow of cartel violence. Abandoned airstrips, ruined farmland, and social dislocation. The molecule, however, remained chemically loyal to its design. Its stimulant properties, mild euphoria, and neurochemical fidelity were unchanged. Humans had orchestrated chaos around it. Chemistry had merely endured. By the early 2000s, law enforcement and governments shifted focus to global supply chains, trafficking routes, and international cooperation. Cocaine was everywhere, yet nowhere central. Its molecules scattered, yet unchanged, like tiny witnesses to centuries of human history. From sacred leaf to industrialized powder, from Hollywood glamour to jungle cartels, its chemical identity remained pure, while its societal role remained mutable and chaotic. As the decade closed, one truth stood clear. The lords may fall, the empires may crumble, but cocaine, the molecule itself, survives, ready to be interpreted, abused, or admired by the next generation. Its story was far from over. Modern listeners might appreciate the irony. A small alkaloid, unchanged by time, continuously reshaped by human ambition, culture, and consequence. And so, with the fall of the lords, history quietly prepares the next act. Modern echoes, global markets, and cultural persistence, where cocaine continues to move through society, geography, and imagination, ever loyal to its chemical essence. By the 2010s, cocaine had long shed the halo of glamour, the cloak of scandal, and the territorial reigns of kingpins. Its molecule, unchanged from the sacred coca leaf once chewed in the Andes, continued to traverse continents, indifferent to borders, markets, or morality. The world had become its playground, and humans its ever-adaptive interpreters. Cocaine hydrochloride, chemically identical to its 19th century laboratory cousin, now moved through globalized trade networks. London bankers, Berlin clubbers, and São Paulo students shared the same stimulant, the same subtle euphoria, and the same neurochemical fidelity. Geography and culture changed, but the molecule remained loyal, a silent witness to humanity's repeated fascination with energy, alertness, and indulgence. The irony is exquisite. A molecule once revered as sacred, later refined for medicine, glamorized in Hollywood, and weaponized by cartels, now circulates in airports, nightclubs, and clandestine shipments, obeying the same rules as always. Humans impose legality, morality, and social interpretation, yet the chemistry is faithful, predictable, potent, and unaltered. Economics plays a massive role. Cocaine's price fluctuates with supply, policy, and risk. Its journey touches farmers in Colombia, processors in clandestine labs, traffickers across oceans, and consumers in cosmopolitan cities. The molecule does not discriminate. Its chemical effect is universal. Humans, however, interpret it in strikingly different ways, from glamour to recreation, from desperation to illicit profit. Technological advancements have also reshaped the market. Communications, logistics, and transportation allow unprecedented coordination, while the molecule remains oblivious to drones, encrypted messages, and maritime surveillance. Its only concern is neurochemistry: energy, focus, mild euphoria, and a brief escape from the ordinary. Meanwhile, cultural fascination persists. Media, music, and fashion continue to reference cocaine, sometimes critically, sometimes glamorously, but always acknowledging its social and chemical power. The molecule does not lie. It performs as it always has. Humans are the ones who rewrite the narrative, as they have for centuries. By the end of this decade, it is clear: cocaine, faithful to its chemical essence, has become truly global, connecting continents, economies, and subcultures. Its history, sacred leaf, Victorian tonic, Hollywood vice, cartel currency, has prepared it for this modern iteration. And yet, despite globalization, the molecule's effect remains the same: a quiet, potent, and consistent stimulant endlessly co-opted by human ambition. As the 2010s unfold, cocaine's molecule remains unwavering, chemically identical to the sacred coca leaf chewed centuries ago. Its stimulant properties, subtle euphoria, and energizing effects are predictable, reliable, and entirely oblivious to the human chaos surrounding it. Yet humans, as ever, pay the price for its convenience and allure. The environmental cost is staggering. Vast tracts of rainforest are cleared to cultivate coca, leaving scars that will take decades to heal. Fertilizers, chemicals, and processing residues seep into soil and waterways, polluting rivers once revered by indigenous cultures. The molecule itself remains chemically pristine, loyal to its design, while the planet suffers from the consequences of human ambition. Human cost continues as well. Farmers, often trapped by poverty and cartel coercion, labour under dangerous conditions. Processing labs in remote areas expose workers to toxic fumes, accidents, and violence. Urban addicts face cycles of dependency, social stigma, and legal peril. Throughout it all, the molecule's chemistry is consistent. It energizes, stimulates, and delivers its subtle euphoria, but its social impact is wildly disproportionate depending on who encounters it. The global market amplifies these disparities. Cocaine flows from the Andes to major cities worldwide, touching elite nightclubs and impoverished neighborhoods alike. Price points and purity differ, but the molecule itself is the same. A gram in London behaves identically to a gram in Bogota. Humans, not chemistry, determine the consequences, legality, and perception. Irony persists. The molecule once revered as sacred, later glamorized in elite circles and feared by governments, now operates in an interconnected world. Law enforcement, environmental activists, policymakers, and users all interact with the same chemical reality, but the stakes, narratives, and consequences vary wildly. Chemistry remains predictable. Humanity does not. cultural references continue, reminding modern audiences of cocaine's pervasive presence. Music, film, and media often dramatize or glamorize the experience, yet the underlying molecule is not changed. Its fidelity to human neurochemistry is a silent testament to its resilience across centuries, continents, and societies. By the end of this period, one truth is undeniable. Cocaine's molecule endures, chemically unaltered and endlessly co-opted, while humans, society, and the environment bear the variable costs. Its journey as a study in consistent chemistry versus inconsistent human behavior, a pattern that has repeated from the Andes to the modern global stage. By now, cocaine has travelled millennia and continents, yet the molecule itself remains unchanged. From sacred Andean leaf to Victorian tonic, Hollywood glamour, cartel currency, and global stimulant, its chemistry has been loyal, obedient to the same rules, indifferent to human triumphs, tragedies, and obsessions. In this quiet moment, imagine yourself tracing its journey. The molecule that once sustained farmers climbing mountain terraces now sits in a tiny white crystal somewhere in a modern city. Its effects are identical, predictable, and reliable. Humans have altered its context countless times: ritual, medicine, fashion, crime, culture, but the chemistry has been steadfast. The world around it, however, is far from consistent. Cities pulse with nightlife, borders regulate its flow, markets fluctuate, and societies debate morality, legality, and ethics. The molecule does not care. It performs as it always has: stimulant, energizer, subtle euphoriant, and in that constancy there is a kind of calm, a scientific reassurance amidst the chaos of history. Reflecting further, the molecule serves as a mirror to human ambition. Sacred leaf chewed in Peru for survival and ritual, powdered stimulant fueling empires and scandals, global commodity impacting the environment and society. Cocaine is unchanged, but humans are anything but. Its journey highlights our repeated patterns of fascination, exploitation, and adaptation, the ways we elevate, vilify, and manipulate the same substance for different ends. Even today, somewhere in the world, cocaine continues its quiet work. Laboratory analyses, street-level trades, and whispered urban indulgences all interact with the same chemical reality. For the listener, this is a gentle truth. No matter the era, the molecule itself is reliable, predictable, and unchanged. It is humanity's interpretation that is mutable, erratic, and endlessly fascinating. And so, you sit in the quiet aftermath. History stretches behind you, from sacred Andean mountains to modern cityscapes. The molecule rests, obedient to chemistry, while time exhales around it. Humanity's patterns, triumphs, follies, and obsessions echo softly, as if even the universe recognizes the cycle. You breathe, slowly, letting the constancy of chemistry and the unpredictability of history settle together. The story of cocaine, its molecule, its human entanglements, its global journey, rests with you now. The world may continue to chase, regulate, or glamorize it, but the molecule remains unchanged, steady, loyal, eternal. You step softly into a world blanketed by snow, where history's tumultuous footprints are muted beneath white silence. In this quiet, it's easier to see patterns, the repeated cravings of humanity, for energy, for euphoria, for transcendence, for control. Cocaine, a molecule unchanged for centuries, threads through these desires like a stubborn silver thread, connecting Andean farmers, Victorian chemists, jazz musicians, cartel kingpins, and modern city dwellers. It is strange to consider. The same chemistry that helped a priest focus during ritual now fuels a late-night club in Berlin, or a boardroom in London. The molecule is obedient, consistent, loyal. Humans are not. We chase, exploit, elevate, vilify, and forget in cycles. But the stimulant does its work quietly, mechanically, predictably. Snow muffles sound, softens edges. In this silence you might reflect on how often human craving repeats itself, each era discovering the same substance and reshaping its meaning. Sacred leaf, medicine, glamour, crime, global commodity. And yet, through it all, the molecule is never wavered, never questioned, never changed. It is both witness and participant, chemical and constant, silent and profound. Even as centuries pass, the story of cocaine reminds us that human desire is relentless. Every rush, every fleeting euphoria, every moment of stimulation echoes across time. The molecule, quiet, faithful, binds these experiences together. Sacred in Peru, medicinal in Europe, glamorous in Hollywood, destructive in cartels, it has been everything and nothing at once. History softens when observed from this distance. Wars fought, fortunes made and lost, lives shaped and shattered, all unfold beneath the calm, unchanging chemistry of cocaine. And here, in the snow, you realize the true constancy is not human society, nor culture, nor empire, but the molecule itself. It reminds you that beneath every human story is the quiet reliability of nature's design. The snow settles further. You breathe deeply. Every chapter, every journey, every upheaval and indulgence of cocaine's history rests in this quiet moment. The molecule, unchanged, lies as it always has, waiting for the next human encounter. Humanity, chaotic and beautiful, recedes into soft echoes, leaving behind the chemical fidelity that has endured centuries, and now you can rest. Let the story soften. Let the years, continents, empires and follies drift away like flakes in the wind. History exhales with you. The molecule exhales with you. And in this gentle stillness the world, past and present, softens into a calm, snowy pause, just long enough for sleep to arrive.